If you've been spending $5, $6, sometimes $8 every single week on tomatoes at the grocery store, I want you to stop and really think about that for a second. That's not just pocket change adding up over a season, that's money leaving your hands for something you could be growing right outside your back door, in your own soil, with your own two hands, for almost nothing. But here's the thing, and this is what most gardening videos never tell you. Not all tomatoes are worth growing. Some varieties will frustrate you, waste your summer, and produce a handful of hard, tasteless fruit that looks nothing like what you paid for at the store. And others? Others will absolutely transform your backyard into something you're proud of every single morning when you walk outside. Today, I'm going to show you exactly which tomatoes to grow, how to set them up the right way from the start, and the small but critical mistakes that are silently killing harvests in backyards all across the country. By the end of this video, you'll have everything you need to stop handing your money to the grocery store and start walking out your back door instead. There's a quiet frustration that a lot of gardeners carry, and not many people talk about it openly. You've tried growing tomatoes before, maybe once, maybe several times, and somewhere along the way, something went wrong. The plants looked fine for a while, then they didn't. The fruit came in small, or cracked, or just never quite tasted the way you hoped. And after a season or two of that, it's easy to tell yourself that maybe tomatoes just aren't for you. But here's what I want you to hear today. It was never about you. It was about information. Specifically, the right information delivered at the right time before you plant, not after things go sideways. I've talked to hundreds of home gardeners over the years, and the ones who struggle most with tomatoes aren't struggling because they lack a green thumb. They're struggling because nobody ever sat them down and walked them through the whole picture, the variety selection, the soil preparation, the timing, the common mistakes that look innocent but quietly sabotage an entire season's worth of effort. That changes today. By the time this video is over, you're going to know exactly which tomato varieties give home gardeners the best results with the least frustration. You're going to understand how to prepare your growing space so your plants have every advantage from day one. You're going to learn the care steps that separate a struggling plant from one that produces so heavily you're bringing bags of tomatoes to your neighbors by midsummer. And you're going to see clearly the mistakes that most people make so you can sidestep every single one of them. This isn't general advice pulled from the internet. This is practical, tested, real-world guidance built for people who want results in their own backyard, not a lecture, not a science class. Just honest, useful knowledge you can act on this weekend if you want to. So if you've ever stood in the grocery store produce aisle and thought, I should just be growing these myself, you were right. And today, we're going to make sure you finally do. Here's something that might surprise you. The number one reason most home gardeners fail with tomatoes has nothing to do with weather, nothing to do with pests, and nothing to do with how much time they spend in the garden. The number one reason is this: they start with the wrong variety for their situation, and everything that follows is an uphill battle they never needed to fight. Think about it this way. Imagine spending an entire spring preparing your beds, buying your plants, setting up your stakes and cages, watering faithfully through the heat of June and July, and then reaching August with a plant full of green tomatoes that simply refuse to ripen before the first cold snap arrives. Or worse, you get fruit, but it's thick-skinned, mealy, and nothing like the rich, juicy tomatoes you were imagining all summer long. That's not a gardening failure. That's a variety selection problem, and it happens to good, dedicated gardeners every single season. Now here's where it gets a little uncomfortable, and I say this with complete kindness, because I've made this same mistake myself. Most of us walk into a garden center in the spring, and we pick our tomato plants based on what looks healthy on the shelf, or what's on sale, or honestly, just what we've always grabbed out of habit. Very few people stop to ask whether that particular variety is actually suited to their climate, their space, or their goals. And the garden center isn't always going to tell you. They're there to sell plants. The hard truth is that there are hundreds of tomato varieties available, and they are not all created equal. Some are bred for commercial farming designed to survive long truck rides and sit on shelves for days. They're built for durability, not flavor. And those are often the exact plants filling the racks at your local garden center every spring, sitting right alongside the ones that would genuinely thrive in your backyard. What nobody tells you is that choosing the wrong variety doesn't just mean a disappointing harvest. It means months of watering, feeding, and caring for a plant that was never going to give you what you wanted no matter how well you treated it. That's time you could have spent enjoying your garden instead of wrestling with it. The good news, and there is very good news here, is that once you know what to look for, choosing the right tomato becomes one of the easiest decisions you'll make all season. And that's exactly where we're going next. All right, let's get into the good stuff because this is where your garden season is really going to change. I'm going to walk you through 5 things that will take you from frustrated and guessing to confident and harvesting. And I want you to stay with me through all 5 because each one builds on the last. Ready? Let's go. The first thing you need to do is choose the right variety for your situation, not somebody else's. This sounds simple, but it's where everything begins. When we talk about tomato varieties, the first thing you need to understand is the difference between determinate and indeterminate plants. Don't let those words intimidate you, they just describe how the plant grows. Determinate tomatoes grow to a set size, produce most of their fruit all at once, and then they're done. Indeterminate tomatoes keep growing and producing all season long, until the cold stops them. For most home gardeners who want a steady supply of fresh tomatoes through the summer, rather than one overwhelming burst, indeterminate varieties are usually the better choice. Now, within that, here are 3 varieties I recommend almost universally for home gardeners, and I want to tell you why each one earns its place. First is the celebrity tomato. It's disease-resistant, reliable, produces medium to large fruit, and it performs well in a wide range of climates. If you've had trouble with disease wiping out your plants in past seasons, celebrity is your answer. Second is the sun gold cherry tomato, and if you've never grown this one, you are in for a genuine treat. It produces clusters of small, intensely sweet orange tomatoes from early summer all the way through fall, and it is almost impossible to stop eating straight off the vine. Third is the mortgage lifter, a beautiful old heirloom variety that produces large, meaty, deeply flavored fruit. It's a slower producer, but when those tomatoes come in, there is nothing like them. Pick your variety based on what you actually want to eat and how much space you have. That's the foundation everything else rests on. The second thing, and this is one most people skip entirely, is preparing your soil before a single plant goes in the ground. Here's a fact that changed the way I think about gardening. Tomatoes don't just grow in soil, they depend on it completely. The difference between a tomato plant that produces 40 or 50 fruits in a season and one that struggles to produce 10 often comes down entirely to what's happening beneath the surface, in the first 12 inches of soil. What tomatoes need is soil that drains well but also holds moisture, that's rich in organic matter, and that has a slightly acidic pH, ideally somewhere between 6 and 6.8. If your soil is heavy clay that holds water like a bathtub, your roots will rot. If it's sandy and dry, your plants will stress and crack their fruit every time it rains after a dry spell. Neither of those is a plant problem. Both of them are soil problems. Here's what to do. About 2 weeks before planting, so plan ahead on this one. Work about 3 to 4 inches of compost into your bed. If you can get your hands on aged compost rather than fresh, even better. Then do a simple soil pH test. You can buy a basic kit at any garden center for just a few dollars, and if your pH is too high, meaning too alkaline, work in a little sulfur to bring it down. If it's too low, a little garden lime will raise it. This single step of testing and amending your soil before planting is something the majority of home gardeners never do, and it is one of the highest return investments of time and money you can make all season. You know, I want to pause here for a second and ask you something. Has your garden soil ever been tested? If the answer is no, and for most people it is, that might be the single most valuable thing you do this year. Drop a never tested or already tested in the comments. I'm genuinely curious how many of you have done this. The third thing is planting correctly, because how you put a tomato in the ground is unlike almost any other vegetable. Tomatoes have a remarkable ability, one that very few plants share, to grow roots all along their buried stem. That means the deeper you plant them, the stronger and more extensive their root system becomes. And a bigger root system means better water uptake, better nutrient access, and a much more resilient plant overall. Here's exactly how to do it. When you're ready to plant, dig your hole deeper than you think you need to, deep enough that 2/3 of the plant will be below the soil line. Strip off the lower leaves from the buried portion because those would rot underground anyway. Then set the plant in, fill in your soil, and firm it down gently. Water it in well, and when I say water it in, I mean slowly and deeply, not a quick splash. You want that water reaching down 6 to 8 inches to encourage the roots to follow it downward rather than spreading shallow near the surface. One more thing on planting spacing matters more than most people realize. Crowding your tomato plants is one of the most common mistakes I see, and it causes problems all season long. Indeterminate varieties need at least 2 to 3 feet between plants, and they need airflow. Poor airflow is one of the leading causes of fungal disease, and once that sets in, it spreads fast. Give your plants room to breathe from day one. The fourth thing is feeding your plants on a schedule, not just when you remember. Tomatoes are what gardeners call heavy feeders. They pull a tremendous amount of nutrients from the soil over the course of a season, and if you're not replacing those nutrients consistently, your plants will tell you through yellow leaves, poor fruit set, or fruit that splits and cracks. The language of a struggling tomato plant is actually quite clear once you know how to read it, but prevention is always easier than correction. For the first few weeks after planting, your tomato plant is focused on establishing its roots and building its structure. During this phase, use a fertilizer that's balanced or slightly higher in phosphorus. Phosphorus supports root development. Look for numbers on the fertilizer bag like 5, 105 or similar. Once your plant starts flowering, and that usually happens around 4 to 6 weeks after planting, switch to a fertilizer that's lower in nitrogen and higher in potassium. Too much nitrogen after flowering pushes the plant to keep producing lush green growth instead of putting its energy into fruit. A tomato cage full of beautiful dark green leaves but very little fruit is almost always a nitrogen problem. Feed every 2 weeks through the growing season. Water before and after fertilizing to avoid burning the roots, and pay attention to what your plant is telling you. Gardening is a conversation, and your plants are always talking. Here's something I find fascinating. Every time I think about it, a single healthy tomato plant, properly fed and cared for, can produce anywhere from 10 to 15 pounds of fruit over a season. At current grocery store prices, that's $30 to $40 worth of tomatoes from one plant. Think about what 4 or 5 plants could mean for your grocery bill. The fifth and final thing is protecting your plants consistently, because a little prevention saves a whole season. The two biggest threats to homegrown tomatoes are disease and inconsistent watering, and the good news is that both are largely within your control. Let's take them one at a time. On the disease side, the most common problems you'll face are early blight and septoria leaf spot, both fungal diseases that show up as dark spots on the lower leaves and work their way up the plant if left unchecked. The single most effective thing you can do to prevent both is to mulch around the base of your plants. A 2 to 3 inch layer of straw or wood chip mulch does two things simultaneously. It keeps the soil moisture consistent, and it prevents soil from splashing up onto the lower leaves during rain or watering. That soil splash is actually how most fungal spores travel from the ground onto your plant. Remove it from the equation, and you dramatically reduce your disease risk. On the watering side, inconsistency is your enemy. Tomatoes that go through cycles of drought and then sudden heavy water develop a condition called blossom end rot. You'll recognize it as the sunken patch on the bottom of the fruit, and they also crack and split as the fruit swells too rapidly after a dry period. Aim for deep, consistent watering rather than frequent shallow watering. In most climates during the height of summer, that means a deep watering every 2 to 3 days, rather than a little water every day. And if you can set up even a simple drip irrigation line or soaker hose, you will save yourself time, water, and a great deal of frustration over the course of the season. So let's take a breath and look at how far we've come in this video, because if you've stayed with me this long, I want you to know that you now have something genuinely valuable. You have a clear, honest roadmap for growing tomatoes that actually produce, actually taste the way tomatoes are supposed to taste, and actually make you feel good every time you walk out into your garden. Let's bring it all together quickly. You now know that variety selection is your starting point, and that choosing the right tomato for your climate and your goals, whether that's a reliable celebrity, a prolific sun gold, or a deeply flavored mortgage lifter, changes everything that follows. You know that your soil needs attention before a single plant goes in the ground, and that a simple pH test and a few inches of compost can transform what your plants are capable of. You know how to plant deeper than feels natural, how to encourage a root system strong enough to support a full season of heavy production. You know how to feed on a schedule that matches what your plant actually needs at each stage of its growth. And you know how to protect your plants from the two threats: inconsistent water and fungal disease that quietly end more home harvests than anything else. That's not a small thing. That's a full season's worth of knowledge, and you have it right now. I also want to say something directly to those of you who have tried growing tomatoes before and walked away disappointed. Please don't let those past seasons define what you believe you're capable of in the garden. Gardening has a learning curve, and every gardener, every single one, no matter how experienced, has seasons that humble them. What separates the gardeners who eventually thrive from the ones who give up is simply this: they kept going, they paid attention, and they adjusted. That's all this is. Small adjustments applied consistently over time. You don't need a perfect garden. You don't need raised beds or drip systems or any special equipment to get started. You need good information, a little preparation, and the willingness to show up for your plants regularly. You have the information now. The rest is yours. There is something quietly powerful about growing your own food. It connects you to your space, to your seasons, and honestly to yourself, in a way that's hard to put into words until you've experienced it. The first time you walk out on a summer morning, pick a warm tomato straight from the vine, and eat it right there in your garden, you'll understand exactly what I mean. And this year, that moment is waiting for you. Now that you know how to grow tomatoes that will genuinely change your summer, the natural next question most gardeners ask is, what do I do once the harvest really starts coming in? Because here's the truth. A healthy, well-cared-for tomato plant will produce more than you expect, and having a plan for that abundance is just as satisfying as growing it in the first place. So if that's something you'd like to explore, my next video covers exactly that: what to do with a bumper tomato harvest, from simple preserving methods to the easiest homemade sauces you'll ever make. I think you're going to enjoy it. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, which variety are you planning to try this season? The celebrity, the sun gold, the mortgage lifter, or something else entirely? I read every single comment, and your answer might just help a fellow gardener reading along make their decision too. And if this video gave you something useful today, consider subscribing to The Garden Guy. Every week, I bring you honest, practical advice built specifically for home gardeners who want real results without the overwhelm. I'd love to have you along for the journey. Happy growing. I'll see you in the next one.